All right, everybody, welcome back to video number 3. We're still talking about persuasion. Of course, we're just getting into it. The first video, or the first lesson really, was about making people feel a certain way, and the way to do that is to know something about them. So if you can get knowledge of your audience, that is so helpful when you're trying to be persuasive. We're not always going to have that knowledge or access to it, and so let's talk about how you can still appeal to who people are, even if you're not completely sure. And this is because we know how human identity forms. Now, there's different views on this, of course, but my take is as follows. So here you've got a way to think about how we become who we are through interactions with other people. And there's 3 parts to this. This, again, will be fairly brief, but you've got basically George Cooley here, or not Charles Cooley, who told us about the looking glass self. His claim is that when we are interacting with other folks, they tell us who they see us as, and that becomes who we are. Now, if you think about this in terms of children, this is like if you have a child who maybe, let's say, they're average intelligence, they make B's and C's in school, but their entire life, let's say they're in 5th grade, their entire life to that point, their parents have just told them every day how smart they are, how smart they are, how smart they are. That student is much more likely to see themselves as intelligent because they were told that. Even if they make B's and C's, which isn't bad, I don't mean to say that's not intelligent, but what it's likely to do is to allow that student to think, boy, I can make B's and C's with this work, but I am smart. Everybody tells me that, so I'm going to make A's, and I can do that. And they believe in themselves, and they become someone who can achieve, right? The flip of that is if you have someone who tells you you're dumb, you're stupid, you're just awful, you don't know what you're talking about, over and over again, almost abusively, even if that child is capable of making straight A's in school, they're unlikely to do it because they don't see themselves as being able to accomplish that. And so there's some pros and cons here, obviously. The pro, it acknowledges that we do have interactions with people and our identity develops through those interactions. It also took us out of the age of thinking that people became who they were just by DNA alone. It was this nature-nurture argument, and this is fully nurture for sure. And so it at least took some of the steam out of some of those earlier physical-based approaches, like what's called, and you see on the screen here, phrenology. So this was the idea that you could tell if someone was going to be a criminal by certain measurements of their facial features and structure. And as you can imagine, they went with sort of Afrocentric facial features and structures and said, oh, well, these are more likely to be criminals. So if you have, this feature that's much more common, in folks with more melanin than less, then you must be prone to crime. We ought to lock you up anyway. And so we were able to start moving away from that through this sort of movement. However, the con is it implies we automatically accept what people tell us. And that makes sense on some level that we would accept it, especially as children. But Cooley didn't really say this ever stopped, So now if people tell you you're great, you feel you're great until the next person tells you you're not. It wasn't clear. So enter George Mead. Mead said, okay, I like this idea. It makes sense, except we're able to choose what we believe and who we listen to. And he talked about this in terms of the general and significant others. So he talks, let's kind of flip it here and talk about significant others, just like you would think of that now, like a boyfriend-girlfriend thing. These are significant people in your life. So teachers, parents, it could be a husband, wife, boyfriend, girlfriend, but it's folks who have big impacts in your life. Mead tells us that their words, their impressions of us weigh much more heavily on us, for better or worse, than those we don't really know, or he calls them the generalized other, so society at large. So you're walking down the street, you accidentally bump into somebody, and they just having a bad day, so they turn around, hey, you're a freaking idiot, I hope you have a terrible day, and fall off a bridge. You could let that ruin your day, of course, and internalize, oh my God, I didn't even look where I was going, I'm so stupid. Or you could think, what are you talking about? You're the one that ran into me. Get out of here. Go do something to yourself. That kind of thing, right? So it's one of those deals where Mead took it a step further and said, yeah, well, it's true. People do have an impact, but you can choose to a large degree, not always, but to a large degree, how you let those views of you impact you. Now, all that's well and good, and Goffman comes along and says, yeah, it doesn't much matter. You're just an actor anyway. So far, let's just say together, we've got you are who people tell you you are. Then you've got you are who people tell you you are if you care about what they think. Then with Goffman here, you've got you are whoever you want to be because you know how to get other people to respond to you in different ways. So Goffman basically says here that we do interact with other people and that's how we develop identity. But not only can we choose who we listen to and who we don't, we can manipulate how they perceive us. And he says that we wear masks and play roles, basically whatever we're trying to accomplish. So as your professor, when I am teaching, I am playing the role of professor. I'm wearing that hat, if you will. And so I am talking about this content in a certain way. I am, making as much sense of this as I can for you. And I'm trying to do that in a way that keeps your attention, and I'm working hard on it. If I leave here and I'm not teaching anymore and I am now playing with my son, I'm not your professor in that moment, right? I am just dad at that time. And so Goffman says that we change our identity based on the roles that we play. And some folks will say things like, well, that's not a genuine person. You're not keeping it real. And I say you're not supposed to keep it that real. So if you know that you're going to get a better treatment from someone, if you communicate with them in a certain way, that's communication accommodation theory. But for identity and persuasion, if you can communicate with people in a way that they expect you to and desire you to, you've won half the battle. They're already going to listen to you favorably. They're going to really consider what you're saying. And it's because you're able to give them what they expect. Whether that's what you want to give them or not, doesn't much matter. And this takes us back to the idea of reading the room. If you can't read that room, you don't know which mask to wear. And sometimes you just got to be like, hey, this is what I've got. I'm just going to strip it down as far as I can. But Goffman would say you never really do that. And here he talks about this idea of front stage and backstage. He says that front stage is when we put on the mask and play the role. Backstage is when we are away from everyone, and that's the only time we can actually be really who we are. He says most people never do that with another person. It's just you that knows who you truly are. Not for everyone, but it is a way to view the way that our identity forms and how we can then take that expectation that people might have for us based on the role we're playing, give them what they're expecting, and then that will make them more compliant, more likely to be persuaded by what we're trying to make them think, do, feel, believe, or whatever your goal is. And again, if you think about this in terms of the way our identity develops, I just want to do this very briefly. Here's a way that people use this negatively, right? So Donald Trump does this really well. So you are who other people tell you you are. He gives speeches. He says things like, listen, folks, you're here, so you know what's going on. You know the truth about what's happening out there. He doesn't need to say anything more specific than that, because what he's saying is to his followers, who are much like, his children in that way, his flock, you are in the know. You're smarter than the average bear. So now they believe that because the leader has said that. Then we see here, they're going to really identify with this much more when he says it as opposed to any other Republican, because he's significant and the rest of them are just general others. Right? They're just noisemakers for the most part. Then when you get down here, you've got Goffman, who tells us, you can manipulate identity and you can change sort of how you see yourself or how others see you. And really that changes how you see yourself. So if Trump said, you know what's going on here. You can't hide the truth from you folks. You're smart. Then he says, I'm telling you this because I care about you. That's that specific or significant other. Then he says, I want you to go and fight for our country, and I want you to make sure that you are true patriots. There's the third thing. So then they have to figure out down here with Goffman, what does the patriot mask look like? Is that storming the Capitol? Is that helping my community? Well, they'll listen further and they'll get some more clues and directions about how to play that role, and then they play that role. You look at the January 6th folks, most of them, when they went to court and they were on the stand or they were about to be sentenced, they broke down. And it was, oh, I was just there with the crowd and I really thought that it was a bigger movement. And, you know, this isn't who you are. This is who you pretended to be in that moment. And look where it got you, right? Now, if you think about it a different way, right? Doctors use this all the time. They'll say things like, well, listen, the first step is getting into the office. So you're already being proactive and taking responsibility for your health. Now, they'll remind you, in my experience, I've seen a lot of cases like this. They're building up their credibility, so you'll see them as a significant other. And because of that, this is what you should do. You need to make these changes. And listen, I know this can be hard, but make small changes first, right? They're telling you how to play the role. Small changes first. Change your diet. Add small amounts of exercise. Then do this next thing. You see how this works? They're using this to persuade people, to try to get them to change themselves for the better. So we can persuade people if we know something about them. That's best, if we know the audience well. But if we don't, we can still understand how they became who they are and how that can help us predict what they'll do in the future and probably have some influence in it. Okay. I'm going to cut this video here and we'll come back. We sort of talked about this already, so I'm not going to come and go through this in a lot more depth. I think what we'll do, the next video, we'll start with step 2, and that will be assessing the need, or what does the audience want? What do they really want from you? And once you can figure that out, sort of like we said before, if you know what they expect, you can play the role. And so we'll talk about figuring out how to do that next time.